Hi. Let's begin with a hypothetical. Let's say that we have a trans girl. Let's say that we have someone, I don't know, let's put her in like her early to mid 20s. Let's say that she lives in the southern United States. Let's say Arkansas. And let's say not in a major city in Arkansas. Let's say out in like the suburbs. Or not the suburbs, like, the sort of small town communities that, dot the surrounding countryside. Let's say that this girl has been on HRT for long enough to where it has had substantive physical effects on her. She looks very feminine, and in some cases probably passes, just as fine as female, but may have not have had FFS or doesn't quite feel comfortable, or for whatever reason, does not always pass perfectly in public. Let's say that she has recently had to move in with her family because she tried living on her own, but she wasn't able to keep a sustainable income because the job that she had didn't pay enough, and she incurred too many medical expenses to afford living alone. Let's say that when she moves back in with her family, that she is now living in an area where no one will hire her because of the fact that she is trans. And we live in a country where apparently discrimination on the basis of gender is allowed. Let's say that she has tried to look to other places to move, but has found that she is not able to get any sort of income, and she isn't able to save any sort of money because, again, she isn't able to find any job in the first place. Let's say that she is 24, soon will be 25, and has to worry about eventually coming off of her parents' health insurance. Question: are the circumstances that she has found herself in the result of her own fault? So the reason that I bring this up, what I just described, like, it's a hypothetical, but unfortunately it is heavily based on someone who I know very well and who I have lived with and shared a lot of experiences with before I, came to law school. The reason that this is on my mind, I'd been planning on making a video about this for a while, but today when I was on YouTube, especially early in the morning, I saw a video that Vaush put out. It's a surprise date with Destiny. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, I don't know who Destiny is. Again, like, I'm too busy to keep up with all the little politics of YouTube, but it seems like it's a far-right commentator, or at least a right commentator. Not morally right, but, like, right politically. Over there. And so, what this debate is, I mean, I'm not going to go through it just because, like, honestly, and everyone recognizes it, like, Destiny throws up a bunch of straw man arguments, and Vaush is actually pretty composed throughout most of it and just kind of goes through and systematically debunks them. And I agree with a lot of what he says. The reason I want to talk about this is because I am not sure how much Vaush can relate personally to the subject matter. He talks a little bit about how in some ways he can, and that's valid, and I'm not taking away from that. But some of these, like, this is subject matter which I have dealt with personally, both with at times in my life living in positions of poverty, and also at others. Like, I was the program director for a homeless outreach nonprofit for a time before I came to law school, and so I've come to know a lot of people, and I've helped a lot of people who have come from positions of poverty. And so I imagine that, like, there's a lot to talk about. There are a lot of little, like, data points everywhere, sort of, in this area that I can talk about. I feel like I'll be making more videos on the subject since I'm not sure if I'll qualify myself as having expertise, but I would certainly say that I know a lot more than the average person, given my background. But I wanted to talk about sort of my own personal experiences, and the experiences of those who have been very close to me, in dealing with sort of poverty and this question of whether or not your condition of poverty is something which you are responsible for. A lot of people who are, especially like center right, love this idea of personal responsibility, right? You see this talked about a lot with like Jordan Peterson and similar people, and it's actually become so widely discussed. I'm going back through and I'm reading some books I haven't in a while. It's actually talked about in this book. Can you see it? It's The Age of Responsibility, Luck, Choice, and the Welfare State by Yascha Mounk. And what Mounk talks about in this book is essentially the idea that we as a society have gotten so infatuated with this idea of, hoisting ourselves up by the bootstraps, that we tend to ignore larger systematic issues that can gatekeep people from getting the basic needs that people say they can work for if they just work hard enough, right? And frankly, that's just not true for everyone. I'm going to be taking sips of coffee throughout this because I have had a long day. I'm operating on very little sleep. I had oral arguments for a motion for summary judgment earlier today, so that was wonderful. So before I came to law school, as I've mentioned in other videos, of course, like, in case you weren't aware, by like me and everything, I'm trans, right? And trans rights. But there was a time, basically the rough timeline that you need to be aware of and relevant facts is that, like, I do come from a family that has a decent amount of money, enough money that they were able to help me pay for my undergraduate education. Problem, my family is also, decently conservative. Not overtly so, they aren't like Bible bangers, but they were people who I was not totally convinced would stay by me when I came out. Of course, nowadays, they are, and that's all well and good. And we'll get to that more. It'll become, more relevant later. But basically, the mentality I was operating under for a while was I was going to finish my undergraduate education. And then as soon as I graduated, I was going to work as much as I can in jobs which were safe for me in order to build up enough money to be able to, be financially independent in the event that they, like, worst case scenario, disown me altogether, right? That was one of the main reasons I moved so far away from them when I went to school. Originally I was from Ohio. I moved down to Tennessee, right, to have that buffer of space. And so when I graduated, I realized a couple things that were relevant. Especially in the South, there are not a ton of jobs which are safe for people of minority status, right? There are a lot of jobs that are family owned, or there are a lot of jobs that have, not the strictest protections on, rationales for firing, right? Like, there are a lot of jobs that are at will. And granted, there are laws which protect against firing on the basis of, say, racial identity, right? Or racial identity on the basis of race. But a problem that arises is that, practically speaking, a lot of people who are fired at will, where the real reason is that they are fired on the basis of race, like, that's what's going on subjectively inside the employer's mind. All they have to do is find another reason, any other reason, to justify firing them. And, it becomes really hard to prove discrimination in the court of law, right? And so what you have is a lot of really unsafe places for people to work if you're a person of minority status, right? And especially a trans person, because there's just no protections on the basis of discrimination against gender identity, right? Like, there's just no protection of that. In fact, Tennessee is getting progressively worse as they're one of the states that introduced one of the bills to prevent doctors from prescribing gender-affirming care to people who are like under the age of 18, right? To teenagers and whatnot, right? So no, Tennessee is not in a great spot. And so when I was down there, it was hard, but eventually I was able to actually find 3 jobs, right? But a lot of those were sort of because I came from this position of privilege, right? I was able to coach for the mock trial team at my school, which I got because I competed there and went to school there and, you know, got the job from knowing the people in charge. I got a job driving for Lyft, which I was able to do because I had a car which met the necessary requirements. And the third job I had was I first interned at the homeless outreach nonprofit that I mentioned, and eventually took over the program director position, which was wonderful work, and it really it was very good for me because it provided room and board as part of the package for working there. Like, I lived and worked in one of the poorest parts of Memphis, right? Like, I was right in the middle of the action, so to speak. But the problem is that, like, while that was a really good thing, and like that probably itself counted for, you know, like, if you were to convert the cost of room and board into like a check or like a payment, like that itself would be a lot. But like otherwise, they didn't give me a whole lot of money. And so really, between all the jobs I was working, I effectively was able to make enough money to cover the costs of my medical needs, right? Beginning transition and voice therapy, which was something I was paying for and doing when I was in Memphis. And so most of the time, and that's assuming I didn't have any emergency random ass things random ass costs come up. Like if my car broke down, or if I needed to call a mechanic, or if I had to go like to the hospital for an injury or what have you, which are all things I had to deal with multiple times throughout the course of my time after undergrad and before law school, right? This is something which is very synonymous to an economic principle called transaction costs, which is that, and this is something which in the video, Vaush and Destiny, like Vaush, talks a little bit about this. If not, then I'll just fill you in on the idea. It's basically the idea that, like, you can plan to the best of your ability to, what your costs and what you will be able to pay for a certain plan are. But the fact of the matter is, as you are executing that plan, that transaction, whatever it may be, whether it's moving, whether it's paying for something, whether it's getting legal services, there are always transaction costs which are going to add on to what you originally expect, right? In moving, right, those are going to be things like unexpected gas costs, unexpected costs of anything that happens to your car, costs of food, and anything else that can just come up that you don't necessarily expect on the front end. And so these were costs that I was dealing with a lot when I was living and working in Memphis. And even though I was working 3 jobs and I was working my ass off, I wasn't able to keep much more in my bank account at any given time than a couple $100. And that was being as as strict with my money as possible. And it was hard to find any sort of better job because, again, eventually I started being more out as trans, and every place I looked at for different employment was not exactly the greatest to people of minority status. So that's what I did for a while. Eventually, I moved in with a girl named Faith in Arkansas, and I've mentioned Faith a couple times on here before. Now, we have a lot in common, right? We both came from backgrounds where we did very well in undergrad. We were very well educated. We were both trans girls. We actually had very similar stages in transition. I mentioned a lot of this in other videos. And the main distinction between the two of us, unfortunately, is that eventually I did come out to my family. Like, eventually I had to come out to my family, right? I was getting ready to apply to law school, and, like, I literally couldn't if I didn't have the financial support of them. Like, I just couldn't. And so I figured I needed to come out to them, and fortunately it went over super well, which was extremely surprising to me, right? Like I was, well, I shouldn't say extremely surprising. I had no idea what to expect going in, which is why I prepared to go to law school, which is why I put in the time studying for the LSAT and submitting all the materials and all that, right? But I figured it was about as good a chance as a coin toss, right? But that's what I had to work with. And fortunately, it did go over very well. And I actually today have a very close relationship with my family. And now they do help me, and I'm able to go to law school largely, if not solely, because they are helping me pay for a lot of it. I mean, the school is giving me a really good scholarship to be here, and that's wonderful. But it's still a really big bill to pay. And it's unfortunate because whereas I'm in this position where I'm able to where I'm able to pursue this education, Faith is not. When she came out to her family, as a caveat, like, I'm not going to go over Faith's entire story because the hypothetical at the beginning of this video described her about to a T. And when she came out to her family, some of them were supportive. She's close with her mother and her grandmother. Not necessarily with the rest of her family. Details are, conveyed to me when she feels comfortable. And right now she isn't able to find a job. And it makes me feel really bad because one of the things that she wanted, when we were living together, we learned a lot about each other, and one of her main dreams was to get a secondary education. And it makes me feel awful that I'm able to do this and she just functionally isn't. Because she isn't able to get any help from her family, because it's not like she comes from a particularly wealthy family. She isn't able to move because moving involves so much money that she isn't able to just get. Like, she isn't able to come across that money because her family isn't able to help her. And she isn't able to find a job to be able to get that money in the first place. Recently, I feel a lot better because she was able to start a GoFundMe to help pay for some of that cost. And apparently it's gone decently well. I might post the link actually down in this video. This is just occurring to me right now, but hey, if you want to donate a little money to her, then, that would be really helpful. But it's hard because I did have a lot of times where I talked to her about whether or not she could move, and I've talked through her. Like, I'm a very pragmatic person. I've gone through the process of helping people out of positions of poverty. Like, that was what I did for a living before I came to law school. And there are some people where it's just not that easy. And I understand that to a lot of people, it is really easy to think that we live in a world where if you just work hard enough, and if you just take on some good old personal responsibility, that you can overcome these obstacles. And I get the appeal of that, and I want to believe that too, because that would mean that we live in a fundamentally just society. But we don't. And I think that the sooner that people recognize that, the sooner we can stop arguing about whether or not there is a problem and start actually doing something about it. That's all I got. I can't do another 10 minutes of this today. I'm on like 4 hours of sleep. I gotta take a nap. But I'll talk to you later, fam. It was great seeing you. I'm not sure if you should expect another video for the rest of this week. I'll try to get one out next week, but I got midterms this week and a lot of stuff going on, so I'll try my best. Just know that. All right? All right. I'll talk to you later. Peace, man. Bye.